Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, Scott Pelley, the longtime host of 60 Minutes, is out at CBS as he decided he was going to wage war with his brand new boss. We'll have all the details, plus in a general, larger conversation about the future of the media landscape. All that and more coming up on the Nick Craig Show. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand on your own time in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Just search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning, as always, is brought to you in part by the Law Group here in Wilmington. Melissa Gott and her amazing team, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call. Any legal questions or challenges, 910-251-6088. We start off the program today with a little bit of career advice, and this is for anybody and everybody who is interested. If your employer or the company in which you work for has new people come in, and more particularly if those individuals are above you, in the hierarchical structure of your business or the place in which you work, I would suggest it is not a good idea to insult the new people above you, literally their first day on the job. That is a little bit of career advice courtesy of yours truly, Nick Craig, right here on the Nick Craig Show, because that is exactly what went on over at CBS News and 60 Minutes this week, as Scott Pelley, the longtime host of 60 Minutes, was abruptly fired by the new executive producer of 60 Minutes, an individual by the name of Nick Bilton. This is after Pelley acted like a complete moron in an all-staff meeting in which the brand new executive producer and Nick Bilton was kind of meeting all of the staff, introducing himself, beginning the process of taking over 60 Minutes. That is the situation that unfolded this week. It is a bizarre story, and it highlights a couple of different things. It highlights the arrogant nature of people like Scott Pelley and those that purport themselves to be newsmen and women at these media entities like CBS News. It really shows the arrogance of these individuals who receive large sums of money in the tune of $7+ million a year to sit on television and be a talking head. They have no idea how to interact in normal society. They are above everybody else. And in large part, that in years past, they have been, quote unquote, untouchable. Well, we have seen in recent years within the media landscape, which is one that is struggling in large part due to viewer and listener and audience habits changing, that's just not the case anymore. The days of being untouchable on the radio, the days of being untouchable on television, they're over. And so regardless of whether you're somebody that's got a high-profile name like Scott Pelley or whether you're a more mid-level person in television or radio, those days are over. And so if you're going to mouth off to your employer, you very seriously run the risk of losing your job. So here's a little bit of the background. We've got a lot to get into on this, plus a bunch of your comments as well. Nick Bilton, who was brought in somewhat recently by Barry Weiss, who is overseeing the news division over at CBS News, to become the executive producer, be the top dog over at 60 Minutes, not on the air, but the guy behind the scenes that checks off on everything and is the individual, the one that makes the final calls, on Monday hosted a meet and greet with his new team. 60 Minutes has been for decades now one of CBS's premier news programs. There's a lot of staff, there's a lot of producers, executive producers, a lot of graphics and video, and a lot of people in a show like 60 Minutes. So I think it only is logical, it only makes sense that if you're brought in as the new head honcho of that program, that you would call essentially an all-staff meeting, an all-staff get-together to meet everybody, see them all face to face, and give some sort of opening commentary as to what you want to see with the program, what's going to be the same, what's going to be different, so on and so forth. This is, I would assume, is a pretty common tactic when new management, new leadership, new bosses take over. I think this is a relatively normal thing. So Nick Bilton calls this meeting Monday with this meet and greet within the 60 Minutes entity inside of CBS News, and it immediately started off with Scott Pelley, who is the host, the on-air anchor of 60 Minutes, taking shots at the editor-in-chief of CBS News, Bari Weiss, claiming that she is, quote, murdering 60 Minutes, and then went on to say that Bari Weiss was brought in to kill the program and is doing exactly just that. He went on to say that Weiss, quote, has no qualifications for her jobs and that the changes she made at the evening news have been catastrophic, so why would we expect anything going further? Bilton, in response, sought to quash rumors that he was going to, quote, turn the show into 60 one-minute episodes and it's going to be like TikTok, adding that the show is going to be exactly like it is for now. He also warned, however, that broadcast is an ice cube that is melting. Bilton went on to say, for me, the journalism is journalism. That is why I'm here. That is why we are all here. That's when Pelley then started digging into his brand new boss, claiming that he had absolutely no experience whatsoever and had no business being there. Surprise, surprise, shortly after this meeting, Scott Pelley was fired from CBS News for insubordination, and he deserved to be fired. And of course, I saw a lot of commentary on social media about this. Scott Pelley was just standing up and being brave. Let's be perfectly clear about this, folks. There is nothing brave about standing up in an all-staff meeting and trying to power trip your new boss. That is arguably the stupidest thing that you could possibly do. Now, if Scott Pelley has concerns about what's going on at CBS News, and he obviously does, then the proper and adult and appropriate solution to this is after this all-staff meeting, you sit there, keep your mouth shut and keep to yourself. After that meeting is over, you take your new boss in Nick Bilton one-on-one, you ask him if he's got some time to talk, and you voice your concerns privately. That would be the appropriate way to handle this, instead of doing it in front of the entire staff. Why is that problematic? Again, because of the way in which it went down. You've got individuals that have work under some sort of a hierarchy, right? You've got people that you report to. And so when Scott Pelley is taking shots at not only Bari Weiss, but this brand new executive producer of the show, this brand new guy who's been brought in to lead the charge there, it creates a very awkward power structure. It creates a very awkward dynamic and essentially gives new management no choice but to fire Scott Pelley, which I would presume in large part is what he was hoping would happen, because no logical person, no professional, which Scott Pelley proclaims to be, he's been at CBS for like 40 years or something like that, no business professional believes that you can walk into an all-staff meeting with your boss, insult him, insult his boss, which is Bari Weiss, all in front of your employees as the host of the show, and expect not to be terminated. So maybe it's possible here that Scott Pelley was looking for a quick departure from CBS News, as him and all of the other left-wing journalists at CBS have been in disarray now for months. Why? Because somebody is finally holding them accountable. People have been brought into the news division at CBS to clean up what is decades of out-of-control left-wing bias and left-wing agendas pushed by people like Scott Pelley and 60 Minutes. That is why he is in the position that he is in. This is why CBS News is in the spot it is right now. Once again, it is another great example of there is nobody else to blame but yourselves. If CBS News cared about being a more honest and accurate news source, I would suspect that many of the changes going on right now wouldn't be taking place. But because they have spent the last 20 plus years, 30 years probably more accurately, covering for Democrats, demonizing Republicans, and becoming a mouthpiece for the Democrat Party, this is why things have to change over at CBS. We're talking about a major shakeup over at 60 Minutes. Scott Pelley, the longtime program host, was abruptly fired this week after, during an all-staff meeting called by the new head honcho over at 60 Minutes, Nick Bilton, did not go as planned, as Scott Pelley decided it was appropriate in a room of all of the individuals that work on 60 Minutes to insult Barry Weiss and insult Nick Bilton, the new executive producer of the show. The New York Post spoke to a couple of people in that room, obviously all of them speaking anonymously to the New York Post, and they recount some of what went on in this meeting, which includes one of the sources saying, "What did he accomplish?" referring to Pelley. "He embarrassed the company and the leadership," which seems pretty accurate. According to Dylan Byers, who writes over at Pucks News, yes, Pucks News, quote, "Scott Pelley had a meeting with CBS News leadership at 5 p.m. to discuss a path forward after his protest in the 60 Minutes all-hands meeting. The two sides did not find common ground, and it now seems likely that he will either resign or be fired. Neither has happened yet." That was in the immediate aftermath of this meeting. He, of course, would go on to be fired. They went on, some of the sources inside the meeting went on to tell the New York Post, quote, "This was a setup. This was Scott going off the show. This was just a show. He wants to stand up for journalism, and maybe getting fired does that, but what does it really change?" A second source agreed with that Pelley's tactics were, quote, "problematic," noting that Scott Pelley should have met with Weiss or Bilton to at least hear them out. Another individual told the New York Post, "That grandstanding thing is insane. It's third grade, playground bullying stuff. This is not the way you conduct themselves." A fourth source told the New York Post, "You're not taking down a dictator or someone who committed war crimes. You're not interviewing Saddam Hussein. This whole thing was a little bit overkill." So these are employees that are under Scott Pelley, who is the anchor of the show, telling the New York Post this exchange, this back and forth between Scott Pelley and his new boss in an all-hands meeting with everybody in the room was totally ridiculous. And making the point, what did it accomplish? Well, all it accomplished was a quick firing from CBS News' 60 Minutes executive producer, Nick Bilton, who sent this letter to Scott Pelley and then gave it to media all across the country. "Dear Mr. Pelley, I meant what I said in my letter last week to the 60 Minutes team. Joining 60 Minutes is the honor of my career, and I'm grateful to be working alongside the people who have contributed to the most important television journalism brand this country has ever produced. While I'm new to 60 Minutes, I've devoted my career to investigative journalism and storytelling. I started this job excited to collaborate and benefit from the wisdom and the experience of 60 Minute veterans, with you among them. For that reason, one of the first things I did in my new role was call you to talk and invite you to dinner. It is a profound disappointment that you rejected that overture and chose to ambush instead. Yesterday, you hijacked my first meeting with staff to disparage me, my qualifications, and my intentions with remarkable contempt. I welcome a diversity of viewpoints and respect debate among the team, but this was nothing of the sort. Yesterday's performative display of hostility enacted in front of the staff instead of in a civil private conversation demonstrated that you have no interest in contributing to the future success of the show or approaching my new tenure with an open mind to collaborate and progress. I am here to deliver first-in-class news programming, not to make headlines about newsroom drama. I am eager to work alongside those who share that goal. Despite yesterday's misconduct, I'd hoped that in sitting down with you today, we could find a path forward. You made clear that you are not intended in such path. Your apathy to the future of the show has come through loud and clear, and I have heard you. I therefore write on behalf of CBS News Incorporated to inform you that your employment with CBS is terminated for cause effective immediately. Enclosed is your former termination letter. Sincerely, Nick Bilton, executive producer, 60 Minutes. Scott Pelley is a total joke. Your brand new boss, before this meeting even takes place, calls you, logical, says, hey, obviously there's a lot of animosity over at CBS News right now. There's a lot of shakeups going on. It's a very dynamic and fluid time. Hey, let's go out and grab dinner. Let's go out and grab drinks. Let's talk in a not work environment and just sit down and introduce ourselves to each other and chat. Scott Pelley, the arrogant jerk that he is, scoffs at that, ignores the offer, passes on the offer to sit down with his brand new boss, and decides that he is going to do this in front of the entire team of 60 Minutes. And the result, I think, totally predictable. And I would think in large part, Scott Pelley was looking to get fired from CBS. And why do I believe that? Because I can't fathom how anybody that has been in the business sector for any period of time could possibly think acting like this leads to any other conclusion. Scott Pelley is not a 21-year-old kid out of college that doesn't understand the dynamics of working in a business, that doesn't truly understand the hierarchy that exists and the way in which business operates. Scott Pelley has been at CBS News and was at CBS News for almost 40 years. He has seen changes. He has seen bosses come and go. He understands the corporate structure better than anybody. So I strongly believe that this was an attempt to get fired by Scott Pelley. There's nothing that I have seen, nothing that I've read, and we've got now a response from Scott Pelley that we'll get into in a little bit. There's nothing else that I have seen to indicate that this was nothing more than him trying to lose his position. If you did this, do this at any employer, not just in the news business, but any employer, a new manager comes in and calls you and says, hey, Nick, I'm Bob, the new manager. Love to sit down with you. Maybe you want to grab dinner, grab drinks, and chat and introduce ourselves to each other. And I say, no, Bob, I'm not going to do that. Then we have a meeting with everybody the next day, and I spend 30 minutes in front of everybody saying that this new individual, this new manager that is responsible for me and everybody below me is unqualified for the position, has no business being here, is going to destroy our very program. I would expect to get fired. Any logical person would expect to get fired. So it's one of two options. Either A, Scott Pelley wanted to lose his position, or B, he is such a pompous, arrogant you-know-what that he thought he could get away with this and not have to pay any of the prices. That he could get away from this consequence-free because he's Scott Pelley, CBS News, 60 Minutes. One of those two things has to be true. We'll get his reaction to this coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington. Thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show, reminding you that when any legal challenges or questions arise, there's only one place to go. Put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Going back to 2003, Melissa Gott and her experienced team of attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the legal issue or question, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. The Law Group is a local firm, a local group right here in southeastern North Carolina. Their office is located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or their website, lawgroupnc.com. When you visit their website, they've got a great blog on there that discusses a variety of different legal questions that you may be dealing with. You can read more about Melissa and her entire team, view their areas of practice. A great resource, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More on Scott Pelley being a complete and unmitigated jackass and losing his job over at CBS News. That'll come up after this as the Nick Craig Show continues streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time with us here today as we discuss a major shakeup over at CBS News. Scott Pelley, one of the top correspondents and one of the hosts over at 60 Minutes, was fired this week. Not because he was, not because he was doing a bad job. That wasn't the reason they actually fired him. They fired him because he showed up to an all-staff meeting with the brand new executive producer of 60 Minutes, an individual by the name of Nick Bilton, in their first all-staff meeting with their brand new boss. Again, if you know anything about corporate hierarchy, pretty good idea to show respect to your boss. I think that's generally pretty good practice. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, a little bit of a PSA for anybody listening today. Not generally a good idea with new management in place to mouth off and act like a pompous, arrogant jerk. That's what Scott Pelley decided to do, and for that, he was fired, which is totally the normal, rational response when somebody who believes that they are holier than thou acts like a complete clown in front of everybody that works on the program. So I just read through the letter that Nick Bilton sent to Scott Pelley saying, hey, I invited you out to dinner beforehand to get to know you. I wanted to talk privately before this all-staff meeting. You then hijacked my meeting, made it all about yourself, which is totally typical with these liberals like Scott Pelley who believe that the world revolves around them. You hijacked my meeting. You were incredibly disrespectful to me and to my boss, Barry Weiss. You made a complete mockery of the entire situation. I then sat down with you again privately after the fact, talking to you about how this program is going to move going forward. You wanted no part with it, so now you've been fired. Totally reasonable, realistic response. So Scott Pelley responded. He sent an emailed statement to The Desk, which is a publication that follows changes in media across the country. This is Scott Pelley's very lengthy response. As I read through it, this is, again, a guy that believes that he is holier than thou. This is a guy that believed, I think, that he was in large part untouchable over at CBS News because he's been there almost 40 years. And this letter really just reeks of that. There has never been anything in America like 60 Minutes. This is how he opens his letter. The Sunday Tradition is the most successful program of any kind in history. For more than a decade, its innovative growth on every major online platform has extended its reach to countless millions across the world. This spring, at the end of our 58th season, 60 Minutes grew rapidly with an unheard of 9% jump in viewers on CBS. Pelley continues. 60 Minutes has been the number one program in America for decades because our beloved audience finds integrity, quality, and humanity in our stories. When stewardship of the program passes to my colleagues and me, our responsibility was to expand energetically into the new age of media technology while preserving the values our audience expects. Now, the new owner of our network is casting this legend aside, apparently to curry a moment of favor with the Trump administration. Wow, great insight. So, wow, shocker. It's Donald Trump's fault. Who could have guessed it? Scott Pelley and 60 Minutes hemorrhaging viewers. Somehow it's Donald Trump's fault. No surprise there. He continues. The waste is heartbreaking, Pelley said to The Desk. Last month, 60 Minutes lost its DNA when our entire senior leadership and two of our best on-air correspondents were cruelly fired without cause. Good people were silenced because they stood up for our audience. They stood for fairness against the forces of political bias. They stood for professionalism against chaos. All right, I have to stop this for a second. Forces of political bias? Are you freaking kidding me? 60 Minutes is one of the most biased television programs on the air right now. Don't believe me? Don't worry. I've got a couple of clips that we'll get to here before the end of the show to prove that this concept that these people fought for and stood for fairness against the forces of political bias. Give me a break. That could not be further from the truth. Comment coming in. Have you ever actually watched 60 Minutes? So the only time I watch, and I say watch very loosely, 60 Minutes is after football on Sundays because it comes on right after CBS's late game that they have in the 4:25 window. That is the only time I have quote unquote watched 60 Minutes. And for the amount of time it's on, and it's typically in the background while I'm doing other things, and it's just on because I haven't bothered to change the channel and the Sunday night game hasn't started yet. It is an incredibly biased program. It's just awful. There's nothing that comes out of that program that's beneficial. So Pelley continues with his letter. For my part, new management has instructed me to inject falsehoods and bias into a politically sensitive story. I've been told to include insertions that are unverified. To date, in every case, I have managed to ignore these instructions or refuse them. Recently, politicians have been invited to choose correspondents for interviews on the broadcast. Giving politicians control over 60 Minutes interviews is not how this is done. Finally, incompetence and unprofessionalism in new management have wreaked havoc. In a case involving one of my stories, the entire program came within 19 minutes of not getting on the air at all, but it did, so I guess no controversy there at all. At 60 Minutes, we have fought harder than anyone knows to save the program that became an American icon. We owe it to our millions of viewers. I am deeply moved by the thousands of wishes we have received to, quote, keep up the good fight. Most of the men and women of CBS News are still in that fight, but now the collapse of values at the top have become untenable. The leadership of 60 Minutes is no longer recognizable. The principles I hold dear are gone, and so I must leave as well. You don't get to leave, Scott. You were fired. You were terminated by your employer for insubordination, for acting so incredibly unprofessional. If you wanted to leave, you should have just not shown up to the staff meeting and like a man resigned your position. But you showed up, acted like a child in front of your entire staff, and were fired for it. You know, there's multiple ways that you could have gone about this. You chose to act like an arrogant jerk. No surprise, you've worked at CBS for 37 years, and this is the end result. His final paragraph. I depart after 37 years at CBS with one emotion. A heart brimming with gratitude for the men and women of CBS News who encouraged and enriched my work, very often at the risk of their own lives. Own lives. I know sitting behind a camera at CBS Studios in New York is really a life risk opportunity there every single day. I pray for a day when those people and their ideals are honored again. A day when sanity, competence, and courage returns. Signed, Scott Pelley. This is what's wrong with media. This is why 60 Minutes has seen its viewership dwindle to less than 10 million people. And you might say, wow, Nick, 10 million people is a lot. Sure. Yeah, I mean, no question about it. 10 million people in the grand scheme of things is still a lot. But it does not even pale in comparison to the more than 25 million viewers that the program had just a couple of decades ago. I found an interesting chart showing CBS 60 Minutes average viewership from 1990 all the way through to the 25-26 season, which is ongoing right now. And as this graph very clearly shows, the viewership has sunk dramatically. Average viewership in 1990 was around 19 million viewers. That has plummeted all the way to about 8.5 million viewers on a trend line. So you've seen the audience of this program has drastically shrunk in the span of, I guess, a little more than 35, almost 36 years at this point in time. And some of that, of course, is that viewing habits are changing, right? People aren't watching television as much as they did in the 90s. People are getting their information from other platforms. They're watching things in different mediums in different ways. The media landscape is changing. People like Scott Pelley refuse to adapt to that. He believes that it should be done the way that it was back in 2004 when he joined the program. The reality is the media landscape is changing, Scott, and you're going to be left in the dust. And in fact, he is, after his ridiculous outburst at a meeting earlier this week. So Scott Pelley is gone over at CBS News. He sent that letter I just read through to a media outlet called The Desk, which covers media news across the thing, and makes all of these points about how 60 Minutes has been this program in which our reporters and our correspondents have been fighting back against political bias. They've been standing for political fairness, professionalism, all of these platitudes that you always hear from these clowns on the left. So let's just look at some of the fairness that Scott Pelley is talking about and puts in this letter that he is asserting is being ripped away by Barry Weiss and the new leadership over at CBS News. Here is how Scott Pelley introduced an interview with President Joe Biden in late 2023. This is not edited. This is how it aired on television over at 60 Minutes.
Late Thursday, we met President Biden at the White House. It had been a rough week, and we could see it on him. Mr. Biden will be 81 next month, and he has said that when he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep back in. But he wedged us into his schedule. Does the dysfunction that we've seen in Congress increase the danger in the world?
Yes. Look, this is not your father's Republican Party.
So there's just a little bit, there's just a couple of seconds, 30 seconds from CBS News and the open from Scott Pelley. Joe Biden has told us that when he's tired, he tends to stutter. And so the whole interview, which this interview, if you'll remember from late 2023, was an unmitigated disaster. Biden was struggling to piece sentences together. There would be these very extended pauses between his words. He did not answer. This is the famous interview when he was asked about Iran, and his response was, don't. That was his entire response to a question about Iran back in 2023. What do you say to the Iranians? Blah, 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 blah. Long pause, and then Biden, don't. Don't. This was that famous interview. And so Scott Pelley has to, of course, intro this with saying, President Biden is 81 years old, and his lifelong stutter, which of course only was an excuse after individuals started calling into question the president's mental acuity in the 2024 presidential election that took place. Only after did this miraculous stutter start becoming a way in which people like Scott Pelley, who is, I just read the words directly from his mouth about the fairness and fighting back and not being persuaded by political bias, so on and so forth. That is how he opened that interview with Joe Biden. Again, covering for Democrats, which is exactly what 60 Minutes had become, is, and will. This is the reality of what has gone on these shows for so long now. There is no other reason why than its own doing. I mean, it is just totally ridiculous that anybody thought that this was sustainable long term. Scott Pelley, numerous times during that interview with Joe Biden in 2023, threw him ridiculous softball questions that Biden couldn't answer. They heavily edited the interview. I mean, Scott Pelley is a joke. He claims to be this newsman, claims to be this beacon of truth, this beacon of this beacon of that. None of that is true. It's all a facade. Just like so many others in the mainstream media apparatus across the United States, Scott Pelley is a hack. The vast majority of CBS News, they're hacks. Their business is carrying water for the Democrat Party. That is all what that is the entire situation. They were discussing this on Fox News last night, and Greg Gutfeld, who I always love hearing his commentary on it, this is what he had to say about CBS News and Scott Pelley, highlighting a very important thing. Take a listen.
I love slow zoom Zoolander. He's got such a fake voice. He's as stiff as a starched corpse. He makes Joe Biden look like Simone Biles. He has these Hall of Fame movements. He takes himself more seriously than anybody on the planet ever would. Every time he speaks, it's of some kind of historical urgency. He's just a drama queen. Why are these guys, whether it's like Terry Moran or Acosta or Harwood, such self-serious weasels? Mm-hmm. And this guy throws a tantrum in a public view, then he leaks it to everyone to amplify his appearance as some kind of hero. He just looks like a cartoon because he is a cartoon. 60 Minutes doesn't exist as some lone bright beacon in the wilderness. A 24-year-old guy named Nick Shirley ran 100 laps around 60 Minutes on a story that they, like many big stories, missed. If you look at people like Nick Shirley and Chris Rufo, Bill Malugins, border coverage, Schellenberger on homelessness, it reveals how far 60 Minutes has fallen. They've not done any real investigative pieces, and all the mistakes they made. Do you remember Leslie Stahl talking about the laptop, denying that it was real, or Pelley himself blaming Biden's infirmity on a stutter? These guys are idiots. Goodbye.
Always love hearing from the great Greg Gutfeld. Everything he says is accurate. 50 years ago, CBS News and 60 Minutes were a different program. I would even argue 30 years ago, and even probably close to 20 years ago, it was a different program. It's not now. And I'm glad he highlighted the Hunter Biden laptop story. CBS News had the ability to do a full-on investigation, and that they did what everybody else did, which was what? Claim it was Russian conspiracy, a Russian hoax, foreign propaganda perpetrated upon the American people to change the results of the election. We then would, of course, go on to find months and months later that they all lied. They did no investigation into it whatsoever. They knew that the laptop was real. They knew that the allegations on there were incredibly serious and showed essentially quid pro quo between Joe Biden and his son when Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States, and they chose not to cover it. Why? Because it would have destroyed Joe Biden's political career. Because it very likely could have, in fact, changed the outcome of the 2020 election. But see, for somebody like Scott Pelley in 60 Minutes and CBS News, that's not good for them. They want Democrats in charge. They want Democrats in power. That's their goal. That's their shtick. That's where they thrive. They get their talking points from the Democrat Party. It's good business for them when Democrats are in charge. So they lie about stories, they ignore stories, they cover things up, they dismiss real legitimate news so that they can continue to be in favor of the Democrat Party and get the people that they want in charge. Why is it that so many of these news outlets are seeing such dwindling viewership? Yes, people are going elsewhere for content. Viewing habits have changed. No question about it. But the second part is one that is totally self-inflicted. These entities have gotten so far away from what they were decades ago. They have removed themselves so much from their original stated goals that they can't even see straight. They do not provide fair, honest, and accurate reporting. They don't. There is literally dozens of examples in recent years of major investigations, major stories that CBS News and 60 Minutes decided wasn't relevant to cover. And there's one thread that is consistent with all of the stories that they missed. And I get it. The news cycle's busy. Sometimes you can't cover everything. I'm totally aware of that. But there's one consistent thing with all of these stories over at CBS and 60 Minutes. All of them paint Democrats in a bad light. And because of that reason, those stories were ignored. So sayonara to Scott Pelley. Sayonara to all of these other jokers and clowns that believe that they're fighting the good fight while they're doing nothing more than being a mouthpiece for the Democrat Party. Good luck finding another company that's going to pay you $7 to $10 million a year to sit up in front of a green screen and introduce stories. Good luck, Scott. You had a good 37-year run. Good luck to you. What a moron. Comment coming in on Rumble. Remember Trump sued 60 Minutes and won $16 million in a settlement? Yeah, of course. Why did he sue them and why did they settle? Because he had them dead to rights. Because they heavily edited an interview that showed Kamala Harris not in a great light. Why was that the case? Why did they heavily edit that interview? Of course, because they wanted her to win. Why did they so heavily edit that interview and then be sued and then settle with the administration? Because they were caught red-handed. They've been doing it for decades. It's finally somebody's calling them out on it. So we'll see. I'm sure Scott Pelley will pop up on some podcasts and some other media platforms in the coming weeks and months if I see any of those clips and if he has anything useful to say. And I don't know that that will be the case. I'll pull those and we'll bring them to you right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition. Another busy day expected in the North Carolina General Assembly today. Should be a very fiery morning today in Raleigh as the House Oversight Committee is bringing forth elected officials and people in charge in and around Mecklenburg County after a horrific story unfolded surrounding the death of a 6-year-old girl. Her name, Dominique Moody. She was there was a situation involving her in which she was being starved and neglected. The police, Child Protective Services, DHS was called to the property multiple times, didn't do a damn thing about it. And unfortunately, she ended up being found dead at 6 years old, weighing just 27 pounds due to the abuse and neglect. Government allowed it to happen. Those individuals are going to be likely raked over the coals by the House Oversight Committee this morning. That will likely be the topic tomorrow morning. Can't say it for certain. Haven't seen the meeting yet, but we'll probably be covering that in great detail right here tomorrow morning on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and heard weeknights, 9 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on the Nick Craig Show.